and your delegations, my colleagues within the university, the program director. Vice Chancellor, when the program director says that he was worried he was going to speak for an hour, he was, there's what you call the power of suggestion. Yes. And the power of suggestion is that the next speaker must be brief.
At least you got it.
So, but I'll be remiss if I do not thank MTN Foundation through its representatives and May NG. I remember the first email that we sent to you, and it was actually before I joined the university. The eagerness with which you're willing to throw your hat and the MTN Foundation, and also to say this is actually our business, as Ndade Matthew Kumalo has actually mentioned, is something that is commendable. And as my colleague Professor Khapola had also said, that this could not have come at a better time. In his celestial language, he calls that there's a confluence of factors and almost like a conspiracy of the elements of nature to say this is the time. And I couldn't agree more with him. But I also want us to take to heart what the VC was saying about the generosity of spirit, because it is that which defines what we mean about Ubuntu. And this exercise, as Ndade Kumalo was also saying, is bigger. It's bigger in my book, Ndade Kumalo. It's also about redressing the past. There was a deliberate, and I'm glad that you use the word deliberate, intention on your part to deal with the redress challenge. Just for the sake of the students who are going to be the inheritors of this property, the gadgets, this infrastructure, it is important for them to understand that we live in history. We are subject and object of history. And we are in the business of always creating history. And this is a history in the making. But we need to historicize these moments to understand that we are passing the baton based on the systemic underdevelopment of anything that had to do with Africans. Universities like University of Zululand and other so-called then Bush universities were systematically underdeveloped. And the underdevelopment was in a number of ways. The first one, program director, is the geographical location. That we had to be as far away from the cities as possible. That's why they were called Bush universities. If you look at all white universities, or historically white universities, they are all in the centers of cities, because the idea was to connect them to the centers of the economy. And we were placed deliberately in the periphery. So that was the first element of this systemic disadvantage. The second element was the programs that were offered. Through the leadership of the Vice Chancellor and the work that has been done by people like Mr. Kele, we can say proudly that the university is now going to offer new degrees which were not part of the historically disadvantaged universities. If you look at all the historically disadvantaged universities, they were not offering engineering because the idea was to put them in the periphery of the economy. But I'm raising this to abuse Mr. Kumalo's words that this is about their relationship, so that you should know that there's a need for us to invest in that area. But also to indicate the point that you're saying that the MTN Foundation has an intention of making sure that we use ICT as a solution provider to educational problems. So in that, you'll find us very willing partners. The last two, which are part of a systemic disadvantage, is that we were also recipient of students who, through no fault of their own, were underprepared, and also through no fault of their own, were financially disadvantaged. So we are a home of this disadvantage, but what we have done is to turn it around, to say these setbacks will strengthen us to a future that is actually different. So MTN's engaging with us and the generosity of spirit that is shown is about the redetermination of a different future. It does also, it calls, as both the VC and Mr. Kumalo and the NG had said in my first discussion with her on the phone. She said to me, Professor Seepe, if we put this infrastructure, how are you going to guarantee us that tomorrow it will not be destroyed? Effectively, what you are saying is that we have a tendency to shoot ourselves in the foot, mistaking that to be radicalism, militancy, when in effect it is a height of folly. All over the world, people value the infrastructure that builds them. So these gadgets, this infrastructure is there for the advancement of African people. So I want to urge not only students, but all of us here to continue to start rewiring our thinking around property. That it is our property. We must start having a sense of ownership. You must see how people, when they have a sense of ownership, even shoes, they spend hours polishing them. Cars. But this is about the development of an African child. So I would like to say, joining the VC, joining the efforts by MTN Foundation, and the remarks that CISNG had been making privately, and even at the beginning, that you'll find in the IC director a very willing partner who will make sure that these gadgets, as you say, and that they are used. I used to have a boss that I shared with Professor Masocha. He had a state-of-the-art computer. When I arrived, I would go into his office and jealously look at that computer. Flat screen, when we used to have the old ones. It was in the plastic. 3 years later, when I left, it was still in the plastic. Because he wanted to protect. That's not the type of protection we mean. But we are saying these gadgets are not ornaments. They must be used to be part of the solution to our educational challenges. And we will do our part. And I want to thank you, MTN Foundation, CISNG, your delegation, Dade Kumalo, the Vice Chancellor, for making sure that this happens. And we take promises quite seriously. When somebody says it's a relationship, we're going to make sure we buttress that relationship.